Hello there, fellow film fans. Zach Kircher here, and as I've said in some of my past videos, I am committed to sharing a review for every single new Pixar movie that comes out. Despite what everyone says about Pixar being on a decline since the early 2010s, I still think this company puts out some of the most inventive and unique animated films among American animation studios. No matter what their new output may consist of, I'll always be there to see what new films they have in store for their loyal fans such as myself. With that, I was eagerly looking forward to both Turning Red and Lightyear, the two new films they made for 2022. Originally, my plan was to write separate reviews for each movie, but after I watched Turning Red back in March, I wasn't really sure what angle to approach my review from. My personal philosophy is that if I have nothing interesting or unique to add to the discourse about a piece of media, then I don't waste my time making a video. So I temporarily abandoned that project, hoping that by the time Lightyear came out, I could just lump in some quick thoughts on both movies and call it a day. Sure enough, that's what ended up being the case. I watched Lightyear at the end of June, and pretty soon after that movie was over, my motivation to simultaneously review both movies was rekindled. The reason for that may not be for what you'd expect though. You see, because of what I just said about 30-ish seconds ago, I wanted a reason to talk about these movies. If I don't have something unique to say compared to the countless other YouTubers out there, then I'm not gonna say anything at all. I didn't have that spark of an idea when I first saw Turning Red, but that all changed once I watched Lightyear. So here it goes. I wanted to review both movies in one video by relating them to a single overarching topic: premise. If you look back at the best Pixar movies, oftentimes you can pin their success down to the filmmakers having a great concept to build their story around. The concept isn't all that's important in making a good film, but it is certainly integral. Let's take a look at some examples of when that has worked well for Pixar. Monsters, Inc. subverts our notions about monsters hiding under the bed by having their efforts to scare kids simply be motivated by harvesting clean energy, and monsters are more scared of kids than vice versa. Ratatouille takes place in a somewhat heightened version of our reality, where the only difference is that we follow a rat who wants to become a chef. It works wonders because the unique approach to a classic narrative about chasing one's dreams allows for plenty of humorous and genuinely emotional moments. To name yet another example, Coco uses its setting of the Land of the Dead and the celebration of Dia de los Muertos to explore themes of generational trauma, family history, and forgiveness, among other things. These films, among other installments in the Pixar canon, work beautifully because the narrative goals of each film are served well by the core premise. In contrast, let's look at some examples of when a bad premise worked against what Pixar wanted to accomplish. Listen, I like Cars, but the fact that the world of that film is basically the exact same as ours, except cars stand in for humans, just raises more questions than necessary. I've already talked at length in a video about why Onward underwhelms at a conceptual level, but to summarize my thoughts, that film doesn't ever justify why its story had to take place in a Dungeons and Dragons type of fantasy world. After all, the idea of the two main characters getting a day to travel around with their deceased father is a nice sentiment, but the fact that he only materializes as a sentient pair of pants is just weird. And finally, the coup de grace of all of Pixar's conceptual missteps is The Good Dinosaur. The idea of dinosaurs never going extinct could have led to tons of creative ideas for characters, set pieces, and world building, but the dinosaurs are essentially just farmers and ranchers? Plus, the film ultimately retreads plot points from The Lion King and The Land Before Time, rendering its story as both unoriginal and wasted potential. With all of that now in mind, I would like to argue that Turning Red is a good movie because it utilized a solid concept, and Lightyear is a mediocre movie because it shoots itself in the foot with a strange, confusing concept. Let's begin by talking about Turning Red first. Ironically enough, I know that there were many people who were put off by Turning Red before it dropped on Disney+. There's certainly a discussion to be had about whether the marketing campaign influenced many Pixar fans openly mocking the film, as well as a wave of Facebook moms creating a lot of over inconsequential plot details. But more importantly, I get that the idea of a middle school girl's heightened emotions causing her to transform into an enormous red panda could be weird to some people. The art style and character models being heavily influenced by anime probably didn't help the film's case among Western audiences either, considering that anime is still a niche style of animation despite its popularity in the States. A saving grace for Turning Red, though, is that it really commits to its premise in a lot of aspects, arguably for better or worse. The very essence of the film is directly tied tied to the main character May's personality and the artwork. She is just as off-kilter, brazen, and ultimately proud of herself as the film itself. Whether or not you like how exaggerated the animation is, one cannot deny that the film has a distinct vibe. I find it to be one of the film's strongest qualities. For one of the things that has underwhelmed me about CGI films over the past couple of decades is their general lack of style. Pixar has even fallen prey to this, despite their work being among the most beautiful computer-animated films around. But just like how last year's Luca featured character designs and daydream sequences that lent that film a sense of childlike wonder, Turning Red implements a wide variety of editing and effect choices to depict the madcap barrage of feelings that a teenager going through puberty would experience. The manner in which Pixar recreates anime visual tropes in their own style also adds good humor to it all. A lot of what happens in this movie is cringe, but the authentic writing and the truly cartoonish visuals help offset the feelings of secondhand embarrassment enough to where May's struggles are both relatable and enjoyable. Turning Red is a movie with relatively small stakes compared to other Pixar films, but the film does well to make the conflict matter even with how minute it may be. Not that all of the cringe is completely diluted, but otherwise this really works as a hilarious depiction of the awkwardness of puberty. It all started at the conceptual and ultimately metaphorical level of May turning into a giant red panda, and thankfully the rest of the choices made with the film do well to build upon that concept in meaningful ways. The result is far from perfect, and still not quite to the level of greatness as Pixar's past works, but it's fun, meaningful, and truly unique. I wish I could say the same about Lightyear. Now, I know that I can't just compare these two movies in a vacuum. Fundamentally, Turning Red and Lightyear are much different movies. Obviously, in terms of genre, they are quite the opposite of one another, with Turning Red being a goofy slice-of-life comedy, and Lightyear isn't exactly gritty, but it's a sci-fi adventure that takes itself 100% seriously. These movies are also very different visually, with Turning Red having all of the bright colors and exaggerated anime-inspired character designs that I mentioned earlier, while Lightyear feels as grounded in reality as a computer-animated space epic could be. One of the biggest compliments that I could give to Lightyear is that it feels like a modernized update for what Pixar accomplished with WALL-E, mixing meticulously detailed environments with characters that still feel mildly cartoonish. It's an undeniably gorgeous film to look at, even though a sense of style isn't quite as pronounced. The thing that ultimately ruins this movie, though, is the very premise itself. When we saw the trailers, we all assumed that this was just the origin story of the character that the Tim Allen voiced toy was based on, right? No. What Lightyear actually posits itself as is that it's a blockbuster that blew Andy's mind upon seeing it in a theater. That's right. The very film that we're watching in 2022 is supposed to be a movie released in 1995 that exists within the Toy Story universe. I low-key believed that director Angus MacLane was joking when he alluded to this in interviews, but no, the movie itself tells us this in the very opening seconds. I wish I could only say that this makes the movie cooler, but it only made the experience frustrating because it caused me to ask questions that I really shouldn't have been asking. If the Buzz Lightyear action figure from the original movie, at least before his rude awakening to his existence as a toy, was so committed to the bit of being comical, then why isn't Chris Evans a bit more loose with his portrayal of Buzz? Why does he come across as even more straight-laced than his take on Captain America? If this movie was supposed to have been released in 1995, then why does the film have camera angles, dynamic character movement, and production design that's much more closer to modern blockbusters? I mean, for a film that's supposed to have existed around the same time as Apollo 13, Independence Day, and Starship Troopers, this sure doesn't look or feel like any of those movies. Everything about it feels dated in the 2020s as opposed to the mid-90s, which wouldn't have had the same level of fluidity and polish as what we're seeing here. The lovable corniness of films from that era certainly isn't there either. And another question that other people here on YouTube have posed, if Socks the Robot Cat was such an adorable and marketable little addition to the movie, why wasn't he flying off the shelves of Al's Toy Barn just like the Buzz action figures would have been? You might be hearing this and are thinking, come on man, can't you just ignore all of that and enjoy the film for what it is? I would love to be able to sit back, relax, and unwind while watching this movie, but literally the first freaking thing this movie asks us to do is to take a leap of faith with its stupid premise. How am I supposed to not have that all in the back of my mind once the movie begins? After all, thinking about the movies I watch is one of the ways I truly enjoy them, but in this case, that didn't work out in my favor. The unfortunate thing about that is Lightyear really isn't that bad when you separate it from that framing device. Sure, this version of Zurg may just be the worst villain of any Pixar movie, the side characters are nothing to write home about, the stakes never feel all that high, and the attempts at humor almost always fall flat because the timing of the punchlines is consistently predictable. But even then, if the filmmakers simply removed the opening titles, this movie would honestly be bumped up a peg for me. It's mildly enjoyable enough on a surface level that if someone was to put it on for some background noise, I wouldn't hate myself while watching it. The fact that this film is trying to elevate its own quality without having the wit and charm to meet its premise halfway makes the film worse by default. People like to call independent and foreign cinema pretentious for one reason or another, but honestly, Lightyear is what I'd label as pretentious. After all, the framing device makes an attempt to have the film stand out as something more important and regal than what it actually is. Instead of doubling down on the core story and making the adventure much more spontaneously fun, the creatives at Pixar just screwed up their own movie's chance of success. This movie is not just mediocre, it is milquetoast. In an odd twist of irony, the film that was operating on a much smaller scale ended up being braver, smarter, and overall more successful than the massive blockbuster that Disney somehow deemed more worthy for theaters than anything Pixar has released since Onward. Disney needs to learn that not everything has to have the potential to earn more than $1 billion to be given a theatrical release. If the movie's good, people will watch it. Simple as that. And that's it! Thank you for listening to me ramble a little bit about Pixar films. As I've said before, I'm a huge fan of their studio, so no matter what movies they make, I will keep on watching everything they put out. If you liked what you saw and would be eager to see more of what I have to offer, please consider subscribing to the channel and joining the notification squadron so that you won't miss out on my future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all have a great one.